I'm starting to get to a point where I'm becoming conflicted about how much I like this season. Because, on one hand, some sequences are excellent, like the subway set piece that features great beats of terrifying action. But on the other, the way some scenes are written and the general direction that's starting to form is becoming worrying. Throughout the entire episode, I was like, something is off with Ellie. And that's predominantly the fact that it feels like there's no urgency for her quest of revenge. Most scenes are treated with warmth and levity. You don't get the sense that Ellie is consumed with her soul fracturing and splintering under the surface. Where is the hate in the ever-consuming black hole of loss? So far, Ellie's video game counterpart and her show counterpart are pretty divergent. Ellie in the game is cold and wounded, but the show version is more bubbly, warm, and playful. It's a major tonal shift so far that actively feels detrimental for what the story is trying to be. Which, this isn't a Bella Ramsey issue, I think this is a general writing and direction issue. Because another thing that illustrates this point of levity is moving the romance development into their Seattle journey. Structurally, I think this makes way more sense to have this take place prior to this journey, like maybe in the beginning of episode 2, so that now, especially on their journey, we can focus on the self-consuming revenge arc. They're actively risking their relationship and future by going on this deadly mission, and the moment that should be a boiling over point for this whole dichotomy is the pregnancy reveal. You're now introducing a massive liability and moral quandary in that if Dina dies, so does her unborn child. You're roping an inherently innocent aspect into a cycle that perpetuates violence. The game treats this moment with betrayal from Ellie because obviously the right thing to do is abandon this quest and return home, something that Ellie can't do for obvious personal reasons. Her dismissal of this moment illustrates how selfishly consumed with revenge she is, putting a magnifying glass on her desperation to fill the void that Joel left at the cost of risking Dina and her pregnancy. The show does the opposite, in which they treat this as a moment of excitement and celebration, which to me punctuates how divorced the narrative significance of revenge is so far and what you have to sacrifice on this journey. Like, do the characters not understand what they're walking into? The show is declaring that they're standing together and will go into this upcoming inferno because they've now bonded together, but to me, that fundamentally lacks the introspection these characters should have, where their odds of survival are fleeting and they've now introduced the risk of a future baby. This will probably be addressed in the upcoming episodes, hopefully, but so far it seems like one rendition of this story is better. And generally for me, I'm fine with changes made from the source material. It's just starting to encroach on compromising how effective this story can be. It's not at a point where the story is bad, it's just not fully realizing its potential. Then from a development point of view, Ellie and Dina go from teasing about a kiss they shared 3 months ago to quickly having sex and declaring that they're starting a family together. It feels like this comes so suddenly and thus is very jarring. Especially the way that particular scene was written, in which Dina just learns that Ellie is immune, an absolute insane statement that should take anyone aback, but she pivots the moment into telling Ellie about her pregnancy? Really? I find it baffling that Dina's mind would go there in this moment, and I guess you could argue that her desperation in being close to losing Ellie led her to say this. However, I feel the more natural progression for this type of scene is Ellie laying all of her cards on the table and filling in Dina about what happened with Joel. A major reveal of truth that can also act as a moment of bonding between these two characters. And then from there, you can have them grow closer and become more intimate. But that still leaves how they're treating Dina's pregnancy as this major positive while in this extremely deadly environment. It also feels like they're portraying Ellie as being a bit daft and not realizing the risk associated with her mission now. Going back to the theater scene, I did like the original aspect from the game where Ellie tries to convince Dina that she's immune. For context, Ellie jokingly says at one point in the game that she's immune, so this scene doesn't have as much suspense. For the show though, from Dina's perspective, it comes across that Ellie is in denial and is lying to Dina. This moment has so much emotional nuance and is extremely suspenseful, especially since Dina had a flashlight on Ellie, which obstructs the viewer from being able to determine what Dina is thinking. I again just wish there was a more natural de-escalation in which they had a dialogue scene instead of diving right into the deep end. Other than how Ellie and Dina are treated and how their arcs co-align with the story and its themes, I think everything else was done exceptionally well. I love the return of opening flashbacks and getting to see Isaac's origin. It quickly portrays him as this worn down figure who wants to fight for the right side, but then I find it interesting how they kind of contrast that with his second scene in which he's torturing the Scar. It illustrates that Isaac in this leader position has lost a part of himself and is now solely fighting a war without nuance from his viewpoint. They argue about who started the war, who broke peace, and each side will always view themselves as being in the right. It's tribalism by nature and is ultimately a tragedy that these two factions are fighting a war that is seemingly avoidable. The performances as well are chilling. Jeffrey Wright has so much weight and gravitas, and one look from him can pierce your soul. I'm happy that the show can extend his screen time because he was barely featured in the game, unfortunately. Moving chronologically from here, we have the music store scene, which on its own is a great scene. However, since that's really the only screen time we have before the action segment, it makes this episode feel like Ellie and Dina's journey is too lighthearted. The reason why this scene is so compelling in the game is that this is a brief moment of heartwarming levity in a sea of despair. So extracting the scene and making it the primary moment before the action pivots the narrative into being more about a romance arc instead of being about the crushing weight of revenge. It's a fundamental direction shift that I'm sure will piss off a lot of fans of the game, and maybe show-only viewers won't be that upset by it. As always though, we'll need the overall season to judge how the story plays out in comparison to the game. It's just so far, there have been multiple questionable changes like the 3-month time jump that makes the story structurally seem worse. The Last of Us 2's story is significantly more complex in comparison to the first game. Not just from an emotional and thematic perspective, but also a structural perspective. So any tinkering and moving around major plot points will have pretty big changes to how the story is perceived and plays out. While for the first season, the plot is a lot more simple, and as long as you don't compromise Joel and Ellie's linear progression, then you're fine. Finally, we have the news station and subway action scenes, which were by far the standouts of this episode. They were extremely exhilarating, and the subway scene in particular was incredible. The lead up of dread in which the infected are slowly approaching, the adrenaline rush of trying to survive in the claustrophobic train cars, running for their lives and getting over the fence, and the final brilliant moment of Ellie throwing her arm in front of Dina as a meat shield so she wouldn't get infected was great. Just an outstanding sequence, and this 20 minutes of pure adrenaline makes it really hard to be mad at the quality of the show. Because from a production standpoint and even how good each individual scene is, The Last of Us Season 2 is a very high quality show. Even if you aren't a fan of the writing or how the narrative is being structured so far, there are still some shining aspects. Thanks for watching, and I'm interested to see the discussion in the comments about this episode. My Letterboxd, Discord, and Patreon links are in the description, and have a great day. As always, thank you to my amazing top patrons, Logan Farmer and Simply Put.